please. The book is Finding God. Oops. Oh, that happens. Okay. Finding God. The book offers 9 questions. Finding God. It's by Rabbi Rifat Sonsino and Rabbi Daniel Syme, published by the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, which is the current central body of Reform Judaism of North America. Share down, please. The book offers 9 questions. Share number 2 up. Thank you. As I'm showing here, these questions provide a template to examine the spectrum of theologic perspectives from a Jewish philosophy point of view and from the various rabbis. Question 1. What is the nature of God? Is God a spirit, a person, a force, a human invention? Or is it some kind of force like gravity or magnetic energy? Is there one God or more than one? Are there divine powers besides God, and do angels exist? Does Satan exist? Question 2. What is God's name? Question 3. How can we know God? Can we have a personal knowledge of God, or is God totally beyond human comprehension? 4. What is God's relationship to the world? Did God create the world? Does God intervene in the world, or is God distant from the world? Can God perform miracles? 5. Does God have a special relationship with the Jewish people? 6. What is the nature of this covenant? What does it mean when Jews speak of being chosen? Are we really chosen, and if so, for what? 7. What does God want from us? Are we commanded to obey God through the performance of certain acts? Has God commanded observance of the laws? Or is the idea of commandments and mitzvahs just a human invention? How does God relate to me? Does God hear my prayers? Can God help me when I'm grieving or in trouble? How can I know if God is listening to me? Is it only my responsibility to deal with life and its challenges? Or does God have a role in helping me? And the last question in this context is, why is there evil in the world? Why do good people suffer and bad people prosper? If God is all-powerful, why do babies die and natural disasters kill so many innocent people? How could God have let the Holocaust happen? And if God is not all-powerful, why believe in God in the first place? Share down, please. That was the template, and here are the sources in the book that I referred to at the beginning. Each of these people listed here have 2 things in common, and I hope you will come away today with these 2 characteristics that they have as well. 1 is a curiosity about God, and 2 is they undertook a serious examination of their beliefs. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to cover all of the questions and all of these various sources. This list of sources is limited, but each represents a spectrum of ideas. Some names are more familiar than others, I'm sure. Our Monday night Washington Hebrew Academy included many of them as we discussed their influence on the march to modern Reform Judaism. Some of my interest in this subject was inspired by a Monday night course conducted by Stephanie Tankel, Director of Lifelong Learning here at Washington Hebrew. She is my mentor in this endeavor. She used much of the same material which I'm using today. Share down, please. There is little question that learning is a big part of Jewish identity. Learning Torah, prophets, life cycles, holidays, traditions, and history. And I've learned from my Musar practice that the most important thing to study is to study ourselves. Who we are, what are our values, and how and why do we behave the way we do? What are our beliefs, and what is our spiritual journey? Today I will present 1 or 2 of the questions that I had showed up earlier about God. I'll put these up, and then I will give a brief summary of responses from the view of a few of the sources. I will leave the questions up in the chat box, and then you will be assigned to a small randomly selected group for 8 minutes to answer the same questions. Answer the questions as you see them. This is not intended to be an academic discussion about the sources. It is an opportunity for you to examine and share your personal views and the personal reactions to the questions. Be courteous, be respectful, and listen without interrupting. Remember, answer the questions from your own personal perspective and be as honest as you can and be honest as you can and comfortable with your response. I apologize in advance for any lapses in gender identity. Many of the sources I quote predate our current avoidance of referring to God as He. A copy of the shared documents are available for reference by requesting them in the chat box along with your email, and a link for the book will be posted there as well. Let's begin with 2 questions and look at some of the answers. Share number 4 up, please. How can we know God? Can we have a personal knowledge of God, or is God totally beyond human understanding? What is God's relationship to the world, is the second question. Did God create the world? Does God intervene in the world, or is God distant from the world? Can God perform miracles? The first part of my talk, I will look at more traditional sources. The first source is the Torah's view of God, the 5 books of Moses, or the Hebrew Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, God is simply present. There's no before God. Most ancient cultures accepted without question some divine force. They did not ask, apparently, does God exist? And the Hebrew Bible does not allow for doubt about God's existence. God's existence is never really questioned. God is seen as an individual, often with human features and characteristics, often anthropomorphized, and God is separate from us. We have a covenant with God, but He looks after all humanity. He created us and judges us. In the Torah, God occupied special places like the temple, the burning bush, or Mount Sinai. Clearly at times harsh in judgment, and other times described as compassionate, merciful, patient, and loyal. In the Torah, we can know God by obeying the laws, all 613 given to us. Some of these laws were elaborated on by the rabbis, and some put on hold until the temple is rebuilt. We know God by His words and deeds. He acts alone. He is one. He is the sole creator and performed miracles as recorded in the Hebrew Bible. We can communicate through prayer and good behavior. He is a personal God and is described like a father watching over his children. The first theologian after the Torah we'll briefly look at is Maimonides. In the early Middle Ages, a large portion of the Jewish world lived within the Muslim world, and thus had access to Greek philosophy. Maimonides, 1135 to 1204, was really named Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, who lived most of his adult life in Egypt. He was greatly influenced by Aristotle's rationalism and its impact on Arabian philosophers. As a rationalist, he tried to explain the Torah in a logical, rational manner. He taught that the human mind is the most important tool for knowing and approaching God. His writings reflect an attempt to reconcile Judaism with Greek philosophy, particularly Aristotle and his disciples. His answers to the 2 questions, how can we know God and what is God's relationship to the world, are spelled out clearly in his 13 principles of faith. It is customary in many congregations to read these daily at the morning prayers. These are often studied as the classical principles of traditional Judaism. I will simply read them without additional commentary. Share 4 down, share 5 up. There we go. 1. The belief in the existence of a creator who is perfect in every manner and is the primary cause of all that exists. 2. The belief in God's unity. 3. The belief in God's non-corporeality, that is, without a body, and He is not affected by any physical occurrences, fatigue or position and so forth. The belief in God is eternity. The imperative to the worship of God, it is imperative to worship God exclusively. 6, the belief that God communicates with man through prophecy. The belief in the prophecy of Moses, the belief in the divine origin of the Torah, the belief in the immutability of the Torah, the belief in God's omniscience and providence, and the belief in divine reward and retribution, and the last two, belief in the arrival of the Messiah and a belief in the resurrection of the dead. These are the classic traditional principles as outlined by Maimonides. Now, your task is to examine your answer to these questions. Share up for these two questions. You will share them briefly with a small group. Remember, your comments are about your response to these questions. I will leave the questions up in the chat box. This will be for 8 minutes. This is an opportunity to clarify some of your views of God and share it with others. The sessions are 8 minutes long, so each person take about 1 or 2 minutes while others listen. It may be helpful for one in the group to act as the timekeeper, just to help keep things on track. Then, after everyone has talked for 45 or 30 seconds, whatever you like, open it up to a discussion with your small group. You will get 1 minute of warning before returning to me. Shira, if you would take that down, and folks will be assigned to a small group. Shira, what do you want them to do if they don't want to be in a group? Just simply don't join? We didn't talk about that.
Yeah, if you're not interested in joining a group, you can just stay here in the main room. That's totally fine.
And just wait, and then in 8 minutes everybody will come back. But I would encourage you to try it.
Yeah.
This is an opportunity to talk and to get some of your views, sort of bounce them off of what we've been talking about. Okay, see you back in 8 minutes. Welcome back. In Genesis, there's a wonderful story of Jacob wrestling with God. The interpretation varies with whom he wrestles. Was it actually God, or was he wrestling with an angel? But Jacob wrestles nonetheless. After the event, his name changes from Jacob to Israel. The literal meaning of the name Israel is he who wrestles with God. So here we are today, fellow Israelites, wrestling with God again, or more clearly, wrestling with an understanding of God. Here are the next set of questions. Where's my... Share up. 6. What does God want from us? Are we commanded to obey God through the performance of certain acts? Has God commanded ritual observances and laws? Or is the idea of the commandments, or mitzvah, a human invention? How does God relate to me? Does God hear my prayers? Can God help me when I'm in trouble or grieving? How can I know if God is listening to me? Is it solely my responsibility to deal with life and its challenges? Or does God help? Share down, please. There are so many provocative sources, and I'm just going to touch on a few of them. Isaac Luria, 1534 to 1572, lived in Safed, Israel, in the latter part of his life. He taught Kabbalah, mysticism, based on the Zohar, a book written about 1280 in Spain. There are 3 basic principles of Jewish mysticism. First is that God exists, but is unknowable to the human mind. And only by observing the beauty and order of the physical world can we know God. God is referred to as Ein Sof, the endless one. The second principle is that the Kabbalists assert that there is a constant interaction, back and forth, between the celestial kingdom and our universe, where we live. Lastly, knowledge about God's relationship with the world is accessible through meditation, prayer, and contemplation. Next is Baruch Spinoza, who lived in Amsterdam 1632 to 1677. Spinoza was excommunicated in 1656 at the tender age of 24 for questioning the Torah's authorship by Moses. He questioned whether Adam really was the first man and asserted that the laws of Moses could not take precedence over natural law, that is to say, no miracles. According to Spinoza, there is no personal relationship with God. God does not have an intellect or a will. God does not watch over us. God does not know us. God is not a loving parent. God is simply revealed through nature. God is perfect, lacks nothing, never changes, and in fact is the totality of everything in existence. For Spinoza, to know God means to know as much as possible about as many about as many things as possible. He was a pantheist. Pantheism is a doctrine that the universe conceived in its entirety is God, and conversely, there is no God but the combined substances, forces, and laws that are manifested in the existing universe. Now, Rabbi Fischel recently led several discussions about Martin Buber, so I'll reduce his part in our journey today. Buber might answer these questions that we find God by genuinely relating to others. He makes a clear distinction in relationships between I and thou. God is present when two people interact in a meaningful, honest manner. He taught that we meet God within the context of how everyday life is lived. The revelation at Sinai was not a one-time event. It is possible anytime. The ideas of Mordecai Kaplan, 1881 to 1983, became the foundation of the Reconstructionist movement in Judaism. It was founded in 1955. He's responsible in large part for women becoming bat mitzvah, the idea of Jewish community centers, Jewish summer camps, and the fostering of Chavurah. A Chavurah is a small group of like-minded Jews who get together for study and prayer. The Reconstructionist movement in Judaism proposes a shift of the center of gravity away from the Jewish religion more to the Jewish people. He defined Judaism as an evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. God, he believed, is the sum total of everything in the world that renders life significant and worthwhile. Erich Fromm, 1900 and 1980, offers a move away from the authoritarian view of religion and more towards a humanistic view. He based his understanding of God and religion on human needs. According to Fromm, finding God relies on developing our human qualities of love and reason. Abraham Joshua Heschel, a name which most of you may be familiar with, taught us that every act that we do is an extraordinary occasion to meet God. I'm going to read something to you from the New York Central Synagogue website. The story may not be new to you, but maybe today it will carry an additional meaning. This is the piece from that website. During the height of the civil rights era, Dr. Martin Luther King led a march from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama. One of the people who participated in the march was Rabbi Heschel. When he returned from Selma, he was asked by someone, "Did you find much time to pray when you were in Selma?" Rabbi Heschel responded, "I prayed with my feet." What is his point? That marching, his protesting, his speaking out for civil rights was the greatest prayer of all. His belief was that we should pray with our feet and with our legs and with our hands and with our arms, but not just with those parts of our body, with every part of our body and with everything we have, with our computers, with our pens, with our wallets, with our bank accounts. Whatever we have in life, we should pray with. In other words, whatever we have in our life, we should use to make the world a better place. The last theologian I want to touch on is Judith Plasco. Her book, Standing Again at Sinai, was written in 1990. This book is critical in understanding the feminist influence in modern Judaism. She argues that the absence of the female perspective in Jewish history has had a negative impact, and she urged Jews to help women reclaim their place in the Torah and Jewish thought. The question is, can we view God as sufficiently great to incorporate the feminine experience as well? She proposes an inclusive monotheism that incorporates a plurality of God images. the hypermasculinity of the Torah and traditional Jewish practice, enforces the authoritarian view and supports a dualism not consistent with modern values, modern Jewish values. Let me read this description of her view of the importance of new metaphors in prayer, study, and writing, and her thoughts about God. Two types of name giving must be addressed. The first is anthropomorphic language, eliminating all those that invoke dominance. We can use, for example, lover, friend, companion, or co-creator. These images invoke God as a partner in dialogue, who calls every human being, male or female, to responsible action. In the second type of name usage, Plasco includes images that view God as a sustaining power within the universe, such as a fountain, source, wellspring, ground of life, even rock, tree of life, light, darkness, place, and Shekhinah. Shekhinah here does not simply imply a feminine side of God, but rather a concept akin to Holy Spirit or Holy Presence that is gender neutral. Okay, off you go. 8 more minutes of struggling like Jacob to answer these two questions. And again, I'll leave them up in the chat box. What does God want from me? What does God want from us? How does God relate to me? What does he want and how does he relate? Remember, this discussion is about you, not about these theologians that I've referred to. How do these questions resonate with you? What is your response emotionally? Are you happy, sad, confused? I will see you back in 8 minutes. The question will remain in the chat box. Thank you very much. Well, welcome back. Hopefully you've discovered a few ideas that have helped you understand your spiritual journey, or at least tickled your curiosity. Here are 4 thoughts that I would like to have you take away today. Share 7 up, please. Numerous and varied concepts of God are valid within Judaism. The belief in God, or God as a creator, what happened? For God as the creator, the belief in God, or God as the creator of the universe and intervening in the world and sustaining personal relationships, is referred to as classical theism. It may be the most common position, but it is by no means the only one possible. Our ideas on God can change as we age and learn. And lastly, no single interpretation qualifies as the Jewish concept of God. To amplify on this last point, centuries ago, the early compilers or writers of the Siddur apparently held the same belief. The Avote Prayer demonstrates this. Share 7 down, share 8 up. Blessed are you, this is the prayer that you're probably familiar with. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. It would have been simpler just to write God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But that's not how it reads. The word God is repeated 3 times. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. Why not? The author of this prayer was telling us that each of the patriarchs believed in one God. However, he experienced that God in different ways. I guess that's just like you and me. Share down, please. Well, your homework for extra credit is to re-examine these 8 questions. What is the nature of God? Is there only one God? How can I know God? What is God's relationship to the world? Does God have a special relationship with the Jewish people? What does God want from people? Can I have a personal relationship with God? And how do I explain the presence of evil? Share down. Again, I'll remind you that all of these slides are available. Just put your name in the chat box, and somebody will put your email in the chat box, and somebody will forward these slides to you if you're interested. The final idea I want you to take away with is this. Slide 10 up. Exploring our relationship with God is not the exclusive province of rabbis and theologians. It is the right, privilege, and responsibility of everyone. I hope in some small way I've made you uncomfortable today. Maybe I left something out you think I should have included. Or maybe I offered an idea that you disagree with. Or maybe I left you with unanswered questions. Good. Go outside your comfort zone and look for it. Explore, search, and struggle. Slide down. Before I close, I want to offer a special holiday wish to Doris Seltzer. I think she's out there, an old friend of mine. May you have peace and health in the coming year, Doris. I also want to thank Shira Singelberg, who managed the IT portion of my presentation. I really could not have done it without you.
No.
Stephanie Tankel, you're the best. Thank you again and again. And for all of you, may you be inscribed in the book of life for health and happiness, and then may this year be a year of learning in all that you do.
Recording.
I'm sorry.
The recording of the event.
The event is recorded. If you will email Rich Gordon at Washington Hebrew, he will be able to secure it for you. So I apologize, there's no time for questions today, but thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate everybody's interest and your participation. Thank you.